This is Garrett Petrie. Welcome everyone to session on PBIS and aligned initiatives. How do we make this all fit together? I'll turn it over to the panel to start.
Good morning. I'm Erin of the Minnesota Department of Education, and we'll let all the panelists introduce ourselves, and you'll hear from us as we go through the presentation, but pleased to be with you this morning. Mary?
Hi, my name is Mary Hunt. I'm also with the Minnesota Department of Education, and I sit on the PBIS management team. And Kris?
Good morning. Kristen Lofgren with the Minnesota Department of Human Services with the Behavioral Health Division, coordinating for school mental health across our state.
And hi, I'm Joanne Cashman. I work at the National Association of State Directors of Special Education, and I'm a consultant to APBS on the idea of crossing systems in PBIS work. So I'd like to start today by just talking a little bit about the importance of this session. And on this slide, I propose something that I hope you'll think about, and that is that we are really not alone in this landscape of practice around behavioral health. And when I talk about a landscape of practice, I mean that, you know, the work we're doing happens primarily in education, in educational settings, but it isn't just involving those that work in educational settings. It involves us thinking about how we're going to work with community providers. It involves thinking about how we're going to work with families. So one of the things that is consistently a challenge is that sometimes we fail to see those that are in that landscape with us, especially when new initiatives come and go. It's sometimes hard to keep track of who else is doing this work. Sometimes we can find those partners, but we don't actually really know how to reach out and create a partnership. Sometimes when we have a partnership, we don't actually know how to find those connectors that will help us take our individual goals and apply them to our shared goals. And over the years, the reason that we're showcasing this Minnesota project is that Minnesota has faced all these projects, and they have really shown us what the real work of collaboration looks like. We all use the term collaboration, we all use the term alignment, and Minnesota kind of gives us an idea of what that means in reality. So the Minnesota story that you're going to hear today shows us what the work ahead looks like. And so the objectives today are really to take this story and to translate it into some things you can use. So in this presentation and after this presentation, you'll understand what this intentional collaboration looks like and how to take this idea of collaboration and really have it informed by what we know about implementation science. So Minnesota is going to give you state examples, district examples, and school level examples of what that looks like. They're going to give you tools that they've used to help them get to the point that that they are working on and continue to work on this challenging work of being in this landscape together. And they're going to give you examples of aligned initiatives that can be integrated into your PBIS framework by sharing what they've been able to do, holding on to the PBIS framework, as well as holding on to implementation science and welcoming the frameworks that their partners in this work use. They've been able to put together something that holds people together in a new way around shared goals. And I'm delighted to introduce this work of the Minnesota team.
Hi, this is Mary. I'll go ahead and start this section. We'll just talk about the growth of PBIS in Minnesota, the history of school mental health. Kris will talk about that. And then we're going to go through the story of MDE and DHS collaboration and the progression of the alignment that we see. So PBIS in Minnesota. Next slide, please. I'm guessing many of you here are somewhat versed maybe in PBIS in the school settings. We started our first cohort of 9 schools in the 2005 to 2006 school year. And currently we have 821 school teams. And you can see from the The blue bar on the bottom, those are the schools each school year that are sustaining, that we're supporting their continued efforts because our training is 2 years. And the middle blue bar is those that are in the second year of training, and the green bars are those that are in their first year of their cohort. Next slide here. Currently, 55% of our districts and charters have gone through the training to be PBIS schools. That represents 39% of the schools in Minnesota and approximately 43% of the students in Minnesota. So we track that progression as we're going, and that helps us loop back to see what schools need support, what schools need to reconnect. Areas of the state that you can see on our map that are not shaded with any colors, those are the areas that we will be focusing on the years to come to help bring PBIS to those sections of the state. Okay. And it's for us, it's 2 years of training. Okay. And the growth, and this is the growth of PBIS in Minnesota, broken down by whether they're elementary, secondary, or ALC and special ed programs. And as you can see, this will mirror pretty much where the schooling numbers for schooling mental health, but it probably also mirrors the national numbers. A lot more in elementary, and then, you know, a smaller percentage in those secondary kind of things, in the secondary kind of settings or alternative kind of settings. And this provides us opportunity to help with technical assistance and to see where higher needs may be or where more specialized needs are. Okay, next slide here. And we're one of the few states that has PBIS defined in our Minnesota statutes, and it sits in general ed, which we're very pleased about. And this was in consultation, the team at MDE did this in consultation with our national TA provider, who at that time was George Sagai. And what we looked at were those core features. What were the important features that needed to be in a PBIS statute? There was, you know, a rationale to use that so that if someone said, well, what is PBIS? We could take them to those core features. And, you know, so next slide, Garrett. So the school leadership team that supports all staff, students, and families. And what we wanted to do was we wanted that statute to be able to come alive, for the words to come alive with real examples through all the years of work we had done with PBIS. Want to hit the next, okay. So for example, in the statute, it talks about that 3 to 5 positive expectations are taught and practiced. And as you can see from the pictures there, that respectful, responsible, and safe, you know, on the banner, those were translated into Ojibwe for that particular school. And on the bottom left corner, you can see that those expectations are being taught and practiced in the settings. The next one is the acknowledgement and feedback system. And you can see from I think it's the Kennedy card and the North Pause, down on the bottom. These are actual school examples from Minnesota that show us that acknowledgement and feedback system is there. And that continuum of procedures to support behavior. That's important too, and it becomes important, especially as we work with schooling mental health to help inform the grantees, you know, what is the tier 1 approach? How are they assisting with tier 2? And a lot of the tier 3 things fell with them. Next one. Okay, and then of course the database decision-making. In our application, we required that they will be using data to help inform the decisions and make changes. Next one. You can hit the next one here, Garrett. Okay, so we do know that the research supported outcomes are the reduction in disciplinary improvements in behavior, academic engagement, improvements in school climate. So what you're going to see, hopefully from some of the examples and some of our efforts of coordination, how these outcomes really came to light and how they helped the schools meet these expectations when they were implementing PBIS with fidelity. And I will hand this over to Kris.
Great, thank you, Mary. Kris Lofgren with the Department of Human Services. And so our partnership over multiple years, and we'll go into that story later in our presentation, is schools have been operational and why bring mental health into our schools? And it's simply that over 1/5 of our population is in schools, working in schools, attending schools, in communities. And the necessity to be treating and supporting kids with mental health and SUD related conditions. Recent data shows that when we're bringing out, other than an outside traditional outpatient mental health center, is when we integrate and bring those oldest and 6 times more likely to treatment than they would in a traditional community setting. And the graph on the right just shows some of the data that supports that. It's when it's integrated into students' academic instruction, kids will be more successful and with mental wellness. Next. Systems alignment. And so as Mary spoke, and Eric will follow up, and Joanne later, is the importance of the alignment. And when we've worked with our partners at Department of Education and Department of Human Services, is really ensuring that we have that framework and that we have that alignment, and that when we bring mental health services to schools to support kids and families, it really is that earlier and effective venue for intervention and identification. And the boxes at the bottom of this slide recognize that this coordinated service improves the earlier identification of kids. We increase accessibility by bringing the service to kids in their home school district. And with those services, we're improving their outcomes for kids with a mental health disorder. Next. As Mary identified with PBIS and statute, school-linked mental health is also defined in statute, but just recently, actually in 2019. And that was with an enormous support from our stakeholders and state agencies to recognize the importance of mental health being integrated within the school system. The establishment at the top, and it's small to read, but it's really to bring that service to kids for that early identification and intervention, support our school partners, and build the capacity of schools to support our students within the classroom. Next. Since 2007, our graph here represents more of our last contracting cycle, but our legislators invested financial appropriations in school-linked mental health back in 2007, effective in 2008 to current. This graph represents the growth in our school buildings and school districts over the last several years. Next. The numbers that we just reflected on in the prior slide, again, mirrors similar to what we see in our PBIS host schools, is that the majority of our partnership work is occurring in our elementary schools, being at 54%. A few less in our middle schools, and then a concentration in our high schools and our alternative learning centers, or ALCs. The graph on the right recognizes again that importance of earlier intervention and identification. And so we have pre-K up to 12 and transition years. So this graph is just representing the numbers of kids that access mental health services through the school-linked mental health program. On the left side there, again, bringing mental health supports and treatment into schools is essential to supporting the whole child. This column on the left is simply representing the common diagnosis of kids who are receiving treatment within their school district. Again, anxiety, as we've seen, that's been fairly consistent over the last several years, and even more consistent during our last year during the pandemic. kids showing with attention deficit, signs and symptoms, adjustment disorders with emotion, and trauma. And we see an increase in some of the trauma symptoms and signs from kids that are receiving treatment in school. On the right side, generally, because school-linked mental health is a grant-supported legislative appropriation, what our partnership, Department of Human Services, is with mental health agencies across our state. And our mental health agencies partner with our school district to support our kids. And the service delivery is on the right there, where that's going to be your common clinical services that are being delivered. The provision of the initial diagnostic assessment, and then depending on what the diagnostic assessment represents, they would come up with the treatment plan for the child and family, working in partnership with teachers within the school, and then the individualized and group services, therapy, psychoeducation, and skills. The lower section on that column is ancillary supports, and we use that term primarily to identify those services that are not going to be reimbursable by a third-party payer, primarily insurance companies, but are absolutely essential for kids in their success of supports and treatments. And some of those common ancillary services is a lot of consultation with parents and a lot of consultation with teachers. And what that may look like is some classroom strategies for a kid with extreme anxiety, classroom strategies for a kid with a long trauma history, and what that would look like for success in the classroom. So that's kind of a short definition of what that consultation looks like. Also, school-wide training to support teachers. We've done co-training with our mental health professionals and with teachers, doing some school-wide partner training. Transportation's on there because it's essential that our mental health, that we're supporting these kids outside of school time as well. And so that transportation is generally reserved for school breaks, or it would be in summertime. And the last ancillary is why we bolded that, is the importance of that partnership, is our mental health professionals and our school partners working in partnership at all levels. As Mary was identifying our tiered supports, it's how our mental health providers are integrated and embedded within the MTSS school system. Next. As we've talked about the evidence-based practices and the importance of that, that was a shift several years back to really ensure that what our providers are providing is based in best practice. And as we've been training more clinicians over the last several years, the links are there. The bottom three bullets, TFCBT, CBITS, and bounce back, maybe ones that you're familiar with, and our links are there. The top one, MAP, Managing and Adapting Practices, is what we consider one of our foundational practices. And the importance of that is it's a dashboard for clinicians, and it's really signs and symptoms. And these dashboards are going to help them determine the best practices and modalities to use for the best outcomes for kids. Our map of Minnesota, all of our dots represent our school districts and providers that are there. The column on the right shows all of our providers. Currently, we have 58 mental health agencies that are partnering with over 300 school districts across our state. Next. Our duties. And so as we've partnered in our co-training between Department of Education and Department of Human Services, has been working with our providers and school districts. These are our project outcomes, is we're really working to improve those functional and clinical outcomes for our kids. We're doing that through improving that quality. The quality is improved by delivering and coaching and being trained in those necessary evidence-based practices. The importance of taking all of those strategies is really based in that infrastructure and those partnerships at the local level. And 4 and 5, where we talk about that infrastructure development, is really that work that's happening at the local level. And the importance of our partnerships in point number 5 there is really what we have found is when we have a solid PBIS school and bringing school mental health into that existing framework and building from that foundation, our kids and families have improved successes. This beginning in 2007, this is our legislative appropriations since 2007 to current. And as you see, with just the state investment in mental health for our schools, we started back in 2007, just a little over 4 million. Our current is 11 million annually, and going into our next biennium, we would be a little over 15 million annually. That supports mental health agencies to partner and work with our school districts. We did a recent legislative update to several committee members, and they had asked for the impact of COVID, as I know many of you have seen the impact of COVID on our students. And these are numbers comparing school years from 2019 and 2020, and just the difference in total number of kids that were accessing services. And as Mary and I meet with a lot of our providers in schools regularly, what we're hearing now is as kids are coming back into school, teachers and administrators have eyes on kids, and more referrals are coming back to our providers and our school personnel to continue to support our kids' mental health. Thank you. And I'll turn it over to Eric.
Thanks, Kris. One of the things as we get started is to say that, I think when it comes to collaboration, sometimes you hear very conceptual things about collaboration and partnership, but I hope one thing that you'll take away and build off of the information that both Mary and Kris shared is really taking a look at those natural opportunities and doing them very intentionally as those opportunities come up in a way that makes life better for people. We were inspired long ago with the interconnected systems framework when it came out. It spoke to lots of the kind of work that we were doing, and we needed to focus on really the next opportunity or the next decision in front of us. So as we go through this section, I think you'll see a number of those themes, and whether you're working at a state systems level, district or regional level, or in a school or in a classroom, I really want to encourage you to think about those really natural opportunities that come up and how we can make little shifts and adjustments and collaborative efforts to make things a little bit better. Next slide. So a couple things as we start, one of the things that really brings people together is shared outcomes. So, we'll get more information about this in this next section, but we want to look at intentionally and systematically bringing those school-linked mental health services and supports together with PBIS practices. Why it's important to define those core features is now you have the ingredients to talk about how those relate, how they fit, and how they integrate. So we'll have some examples of that. We want to meet our common goal of really earlier access to evidence-based practices and enhanced prevention services. Again, what we've learned through our MTSS work, it is so much larger than any one person or even a handful of people. So this is an all hands deck on approach, and in service to our goal of early identification and prevention, let's get organized in that regard. Third one is really a higher quality of care when practices are implemented within a tier framework. Again, we'll talk about a couple of examples with that, but as an organizing framework to talk about the practices available to kids, not the funding stream, not the label or the title of the person that's providing them, but the actual practices that are available. It's a really important discussion, and we'll show some tools and examples related to that. Having clearly defined roles and relationships among school employed and community employed providers. Again, sometimes this is kind of like a fly ball to the outfielder where, in baseball where 3 potential people could catch the ball. We need communication to know how that play is going to happen in service and support for a specific student. We'll have some examples of that. Next is cross-system leadership and training to promote a common approach. We'll have some examples of that as well. Next slide. Interventions will have an increased likelihood of generalization with an impact across settings. As we think from school to home to community, and the partnership and role that each of our partners play, it's an important idea. Accessing services within the school setting, Kris touched this a little bit, to become less stigmatizing and increasing the likelihood of that early intervention. That's a great idea. And like the last outcome we wanted to highlight is that effective cross-teaming structure that promotes that communication, coordination of services, and enhanced family engagement in systematic ways. And really why it's important, it really allows us to better progress monitor, reduce duplication, identify gaps between supports that are available, and to measure impact and fidelity. Next slide. One thing, a couple of years ago, we saw this and it really spoke to each of us and the experience and what we've been learning and where we've been seeing improved results. But this came from the Journal of School Mental Health. And it really talked about that school mental health and PBIS provides one of the most comprehensive examples and the potential power of what we've been learning through implementation science to promote evidence-based programs. And when we join these programs together and support them with implementation strategies, we can meaningfully advance both of the emerging field of implementation science and the social, emotional, and behavioral wellness of students. It really spoke to like gains and progress that we had seen, and we kind of come back to this from time to time, but it really makes sense. And I hope you can see in the examples, contributions from each of those places, integrated in line that's allowing us to kind of move forward collectively. Next slide. A couple of things, this is just an example. We could have multiple things, but as you enter a school building and ask the immediate concern, this was a survey that was done a number of years ago by the National Association of Elementary School Principals, but it really spoke, on the highest level of the things that principals are thinking about is the number of students with emotional problems and student mental health issues. You throw behavior and a number of other things in there, but the majority of principals, 65 to 73%, are thinking about those two things specifically, providing a continuum of services for students who are at risk, again, very high. So as we think of this, and we're thinking about the fit of what we have to offer and how we organize this, I think, knowing that context in the buildings we come into is critically important. Next slide. So I'm going to walk through a number of examples of how our partnership really has progressed across time. I have to acknowledge, lots of really great advocates and partners in this process that really many of the things we're talking about and successes we're seeing today are built upon conversations, things that even go back to like these recommendations that started to emerge back in 2010. That are really public expressions of a consensus to move forward together. So this is an example, and we'll see a couple others moving forward. Back in 2010, there was a report to the governor that was coming out of our State Advisory Council on Mental Health, and they had a specific subcommittee on children's mental health. And among the most important priorities, and they could see the emerging promise of PBIS, they could see the emerging promise of school-linked mental health. And they really started to advocate for the coordination and alignment of those. As you looked at the maps, we'll talk about some numbers that are shared between those at the end of this section, but more and more opportunities coming up, and people didn't want them to coexist in the same building without coordination and alignment. They really believed in that synergy together. There's a belief that we can more organize effectively our supports in school-linked mental health if we're placing them in places that have an effective tier 1 system in place, and are also managing the tier 2 and tier 3 supports and behavior and mental health that exist beyond that as well. So this was a neat example that dates back to 2010. And you can see in these earliest forms of those recommendations, in a moment, you'll see kind of how those are built out over time. Next slide. So as we think about that, this is a slide where I really want to encourage people again to think, what are those natural opportunities for you? Because the magic doesn't always happen in one day, but those intentional steps at collaboration really do build off of each other and, contribute to each other over time. So I told you about some of the partners we had in our state that helped develop those recommendations moving forward. As we skip forward a couple of years to that window of 2012 to 2014, again, there was a renewed recommendation with a little bit more precision in the language in 2012, 2014. We began to meet more regularly across agencies that were managing these two systems and support. New RFP went out for providers from DHS to help fund those community-based school-linked mental health providers. And you're starting to see some new ideas and some new language about the relationship of that to mix together. And, this is where we really started to identify that MTSS is the framework to organize those practices and support. Again, we're still learning a lot about that now, but the origins of having that alignment conversation, how these things fit together, really did start back for us, almost a decade ago now. Fast forward a bit to 2014 to 2016, and again, you're talking specifically about alignment now and what that looks like, and trying to find those exemplar programs who are doing this well. As Kris identified, highlighting the specific EBPs that were supported, they are not the only ones in the world of mental health, but having a base of core practices supported throughout those programs was a great recommendation, and the training that came forward from there. And looking MDE and DHS Human Services looking at our collective data together around implementation and around results to keep finding examples where this was working well. Skip forward another couple of years and you can see starting to have a state conference together where we share in the planning, preparation and delivery of that. You can see a new RFP coming up again, development in a new 5-year cycle, improving and becoming more specific about that collaboration. We'll share a little bit about that with a couple of tools and processes in a minute. You can see one example of that is the give and get chart that really was laying out the contributions of each partner in this process, from a school-linked mental health provider, community provider, to a specific school they were collaborating with. So they would predictably know what they're contributing to it, what they get in return, and what shared outcomes they're working towards. We'll walk through that example in a moment. And again, you can just see that sense of building across these years and across time. These are the natural opportunities that allow us to take a little bit more focus, provide a little bit of support, increase the context and the fit that providers have as they're working with specific schools in service of these improved outcomes. One thing I wanted to highlight in 2018-2020, in that timeframe, is a co-presentation put together called All Things School. And we're thinking about just the context of an outside provider coming into a school and some just general background knowledge that would be helpful to know as you go in instead of learning them incidentally as you go. And it really was a neat example of that collaboration, again, to think about that context and training that people might need to help support that. Last thing we want to highlight as we move on this collaboration, and again, you can see like the context and the fit of meeting together regularly, increased regular predictable communication, and thinking about things like telehealth services in a conversation that started even prior to COVID, but was really helpful to be able to hit running and think about what those adaptations were along the way. I hope what you can see in this continuum, again, is that collaboration was not one specific thing, but it really was a series of opportunities to take a little bit sharper focus and provide a little bit more support in what that collaboration looks like and collecting that over time. Next slide. So this, again, a kind of a description and more of a narrative format of most of what I have just talked about in that previous slide. I really wanted to highlight, again, the efforts from MDE and DHS to identify exemplars, PBIS schools who are also providing quality school-linked mental health services. One thing we learned long ago is the importance of exemplars to show that this really is real and doable, not just in some faraway place, but in a community close to me. So we continue to really lift that up and highlight those exemplars out and think about how to operationalize that process, both identification of effective implementation with improved results is that mix that we're looking for. I'm very pleased that we have a growing number, and you'll see a couple of examples at the end of this presentation as well. Next slide, Garrett. So one of the things I just want to go to a couple of the tools quickly to get you thinking about this, and you'll see these in the school examples and the examples that you see coming up. But the first one is coming up with a simple thing that is called, we just give the term the give and get chart, or the give and get agreement. And we made it a requirement in the last RFP that school-linked mental health providers would think and develop these in partnerships with the schools they would support. So you can see the columns if that start to identify what the school-linked mental health provider gets, what the school gets, what the school-linked mental health provider gives, and the school gives, and then what shared outcomes they're working for. So a pretty simple layout, but again, with a number of different stakeholders and players that tend to turn over and change over time, really helpful to have this agreement in place to help solidify what the partnership is about. Neat things for us is this really allows for mutual selection. Again, I'm really clear what I'm committing, and I'm really clear what I get in return. That's pretty cool. We're clear about the shared outcomes that we're working towards. There's a lot of things going on and a lot of things that can be kind of similar. So having this, predictably available to go back to if we have to remind ourselves what our shared outcomes are, really helpful that way. And it really helps to support that buy-in from the very beginning of the process, not getting into it and trying to figure this out later. The shared outcomes, again, we're looking to promote a common vision and service to the student outcomes through this collaboration. We find when we do this, again, we really do share the same outcomes for student success. It's an easy place to come together to, and allows us to solidify that partnership. The other is really thinking about those measurable outcomes that we can do, again, so we can monitor our progress, so we can share our successes, and we can action plan if things don't go exactly like we thought they would, to make some adjustments to make it even better. The next tool we wanted to share is really thinking about resource mapping. And we do it kind of in the context of staff because it's a common place that people start. So as you think about this, some of this plays for collaboration. We're finding that people have very different MTSS systems defined or developing and emerging in place. Some have them very neatly expressed, but some just aren't quite there yet. So this is a chance to come in with, I can talk about the people in my school that provide support. And usually some of these boxes are easy to fill in. So Mary Smith is a school psychologist. I know that she's here Monday, Wednesday, Friday between these hours. Here's the students that she serves. There's some general responsibilities she has, but it's fun to go into like what evidence-based practices can she support in our school? And for Mary, it's check and connect, social skills groups, and FBAs and VIPs. So, in our constellation, like I have a better understanding. It's not just her role and her title. It's just not the funding stream of special education. But I can think of the ways in which, there's going to be some natural connections and collaboration, helping support connection and connectivity, eliminating redundancy or duplication. I go to, again, thinking of Jim Green, the school-linked mental health provider on the second line. He's also here Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So you have some natural points of potential collaboration. He can potentially serve all students, providing school-linked mental health services. He's also a member of the PBIS team at Tier 1. I know when I go to EVPs, he's prepared to deliver a mix of CBITS, MAP, and bounce back. So as we're thinking about our Tier 1 supports and students that need more support, again, it just provides a natural point for that collaboration. You can go down the list again, and this is just a great way to get started if you don't have a well-defined, articulated system, or if there's some things in other areas you have a question about, it can really help facilitate those great discussions at a school level. Next slide. So as we close out this section and get to the examples, I just wanted to highlight that you can see the timeline of little steps we took to improve our alignment and collaboration across time. That we have these two funded systems. They've been increasingly aligned over the years, and I hope you saw some examples of that. As we think about our current numbers, again, you can see in Kris's slide that there are about 1,100 schools out of the 2,000 or so schools in Minnesota currently served by school-linked mental health grantees. That's great, and those numbers are increasing and scaling. One plug I would put out for local school building implementers is that your results really do matter. You know, when this goes well, when you produce better results, when it provides the support you need. Again, that's been very successful in leveraging legislative conversations to get more resources to do this. And it doesn't have to be the legislature, it could be within district or other places. Having effective implementation and improved results usually serves the purpose of scaling very well. So just a plug I wanted to put in for that. When we think about those 1,100 schools, 37% of them have been trained and supported in PBIS to date. So that's 456 school buildings throughout the state. Again, just a very natural point of collaboration and a place for us to really study what are the results in these places. Of course, we're interested in all 2,000 schools at the Department of Education, but when we want to learn about the specific collaboration, it's not a hypothetical. We have a learning lab of 456 places where we can learn more about this. And when we go back to look at all the Mary's slide of all the schools that have been trained in PBIS, again, it's cool for us to see that 66% of those are now receiving services and supports of a school-linked mental health grantee. And that's cool to us to think, again, when they're going through training, many of them worried about, you know, what we would do in the advanced tiers, and to know that there are practices that can be put on tier 2 and tier 3 within that MTSS framework from another collaborative partner. Very cool outcome that we're very pleased about. So the last couple of items, again, we've hit these before, but you know, we're looking to support mental health for all students. We're looking for a preventative approach, identifying need early and providing more support in a collaborative way, and seeing really the need and the function of the partnership across our programs to produce that. So that's it. With that, we want to get to our examples. So I'll toss it over to Mary.
Hi, that was great, Eric. What a nice story to reflect on that collaboration. So I'm going to start with an elementary school example. It's up in northern Minnesota. It's a school with a strong history of school-linked mental health. Actually, it provided mental health services and had community partners embedded before the school-linked mental health grants came about. And also the school needed to reconnect with the PBIS fidelity measure. I was presenting on the TFI and MTSS at one of the grantee meetings, and it was the school-linked mental health provider that came up to me and said, can you check if our school has done those things? And looking at that, that opened up a discussion and an opportunity for us to go into the building. And we did a TFI with them with the enhanced mental health component. So that was the start of a journey of how this collaboration between us got going. They had examples of professional development being delivered collaboratively by school and community partners, and especially when I was there, they were talking about suicide awareness and ideation was one of the first ones that they did together. It's also a school that has 67% or 68% of families on students getting free and reduced lunch. And there had been some trauma in the community. So we talked about, and we have some examples, we talked about, you know, how PBIS and school mental health could work together to support that. And in all of that, it was actually a blue ribbon school. So I think like the year after we started working with them, and the principal in her application and really contributed PBIS to a lot of PBIS to the school culture. So, next slide, Garrett. And here is a give and get. Eric showed you a blank one. This is the example from this school building, and it was really well thought out. And what we loved about reading, you know, when we were reading the respondents' application to the RFP, and this one really showed, you know, what it is, and it's that shared outcomes, you know, that that we wanted to highlight. If you look at one of them, it says like schooling mental health and support school staff work collaboratively to support students in crisis and things like that. And when you there's a handout with just a bigger version of this, and it just really spoke to this school and how collaborative they were. Some of the other give and gets that we read, who maybe weren't as far advanced, had simple things in their give and get, like the school will provide the mental health provider with space to do their work. So you can see with our give and gets gave us a continuum, but this is a nice example of how this school really collectively worked with their PBIS team and their community provider to build this. Okay, next slide, Garrett. And then, like I said, we did the tiered fidelity inventory with the mental health enhancements, and the next couple of slides that give examples of them, what it looks like. But I'm just going to highlight, it links the PBIS critical features to include some of that schooling mental health grantee partnerships. The specific positive items from this administration at this building that really came out that they were very strong with were team composition, professional development, and classroom procedures. So that was important because the schooling mental health provider sat on both a tier 1 PBIS team and also supported the tier 2, tier 3 team. They did professional development collectively, and during the interview with the team there, the principal noted that the staff really reflected back that how wonderful it was that no matter if they had a problem, they could be one in the building. So the principal, noted that that was a real positive step. And then classroom procedures there's another handout, the trauma-informed one, that we talk about classroom procedures. Next slide, Garrett. You can skip these. These are just for you guys to have an example. You can skip the next 2 slides, Garrett. Next one. Next one. Okay. So I think it was in 2017, Midwest PBIS came up with those 2 nice handouts. One, how school-wide PBIS really, what is the connection between that and helping kids who have experienced trauma, and what about the classroom practices? So a lot of times, especially in our all things school, Kris and I would give these as examples and talk about, what you're doing in the classroom is helping kids. And this district took it on and really used this as a learning opportunity to help their schooling mental health providers understand the classroom better and just some simple steps, and how PBIS was really helping for kids in trauma. And I think I'm going to hand this over next. I'm going to hand this to Kris now.
Awesome. Thanks, Mary. And as we were talking about some of those local examples, as Mary just identified one in our northern part of our state, more central is St. Cloud School District. And really, again, being an exemplar PBIS district for multiple years, they have a mental health provider located in every one of their buildings. And again, as we've talked, that partnership piece is that really, it's not a one size or one thing for all of our districts or partners, but it really grew over the years. That when distance learning was put in place back at the beginning of COVID, their framework and structure really allowed for continued and effective collaboration to support kids. Next. So why we really wanted to highlight this story is there was the St. Cloud Times, the newspaper, did a really nice article about how PBIS and School Linked Mental Health Partnership supports kids when kids are not in school. And it went through, and we had support from the executive director, the student support director, our mental health professional, and it really talked about that PBIS School Linked Mental Health framework and how that best supports having that structure there at the beginning of the pandemic, that was built and it was very efficient and effective in supporting kids and families over this past year, especially. I do want to just make a quick note, reflecting on time, I know, but training in telehealth with schooling to mental health, as Eric had mentioned, it's been something that our state has been looking at prior to the pandemic. This agency, in partnership with the school, ensured that all of their mental health professionals were trained within about 3 days. And the school supported with ensuring that those school devices had the right apps and connectivity, so kids could continue to receive services via telehealth. Next. And I'll pass back to Mary. Thank you.
Hi, this example comes from, it was actually the community agency that did something for the school, which we found very interesting. So Kris and I sit in each other's meetings once to twice a month. She'll meet with the mental health providers. I'll meet with the related service personnel that fall under education. And it was interesting because the day this story hit social media, we both had a meeting, Kris with her group and mine, and I with my group. And the county public health office got some CARES funding, and they wanted to give back to the various agencies. So they tasked the Northwestern Mental Health Center, which is one of the grantees, with providing self-care activities to schools in the county. And the ones we have highlighted are PBIS districts. So it was interesting to see, and there were 2 phases to the rollout. Go ahead, Garrett, next one. And if those of you who work in PBIS buildings, you'll recognize some of these strategies as PBIS strategies. So they had a self-care bingo that they placed in the lounge, office, mailbox, but the staff was supposed to, play the bingo, but bring the cards back to the community partners there. So what a great way to learn to know them, especially some of them were new. And so for a few weeks, the bingo cards were drawn and people received gifts, gift cards for businesses in the local, in the areas. And there was like local pizza, chocolate bakery. So they used all that money in their communities. Next one. And then the second phase of the rollout is the community agency delivered a self-care bag for every staff in the district and delivered those to the buildings. And when we heard, and that included everybody, custodians, bus drivers, paras, the superintendent, the principals, the teachers, the related service staff. And as we heard the community provider who did this, they were so excited about their work. And they said, it just opened up a dialogue between them. And it was so greatly appreciated. And at the related service meeting, I had a social worker from the district, and she said, everybody was stunned that they included, the school staff was just so happy that they included everybody. And that really fostered just a wonderful partnership. So those are 3 simple examples, and they'll still, it's when you think about, in PBIS, that positive phone call home, or you've built a relationship. This is what this agency helped to do. And we all know how stressed everybody is, especially in the school building. So this was warmly received and welcomed. Next, and I think this will be Eric and Joanne.
Great. So, as we close up, and maybe there's some time for a quick question or two, here at the end too, but we just want to highlight that really this collaboration was built over time and focused on really some small, manageable, doable things that would really make life better and focus for more people over time. Hopefully that's a generalizable message, whether you're at a state level, a regional level, a district level, or a school building level. Really think about that role in selecting and promoting exemplars and creating new ideas that, even if you've been doing this for a long time, maybe you find out a new idea and something you can do a little bit better or different, and that selecting and promoting that, and also making it seem doable for those that are just getting started, is incredibly important. really thinking about new opportunities for learning and collaboration. Again, we'll have a new RFP coming out in a couple of years. This runs on a 5-year cycle. So we always think, what have we learned and what can we sharpen our focus on and make a little bit better? And really thinking about the role of intentional collaboration, and how that supports improved outcomes. At the state level, we're always thinking about the system that makes those outcomes possible and better at a local level. At a district level, you're probably thinking at a classroom level, et cetera. So really thinking about that linked line collaboration wherever you are on this continuum, supporting that to make better outcomes available. Next slide. Yeah, go ahead, Joanne.
Okay, I hope that, those of you that were a part of this presentation today see why it was so important to actually feature this story of Minnesota, because Minnesota has really exemplified this idea of taking and being faithful to the technical side of this work, the research, the evidence-based practice, the implementation science. But in addition to being faithful to that technical side, they are equally faithful to the human side, raising awareness about the kind of things that build partnerships, sustain partnerships through those times when we have fundings and when we don't have fundings. The idea of reaching out to community collaborators that can add new things that we haven't even thought of. Minnesota is a wonderful story of a comprehensive approach to both PBIS and this idea of integrated, aligned, school-connected behavioral health and community mental health. So one of the things that we want to do through APBS is to create more discussions around these kinds of strategies. The strategies that do, as Eric said, address what the state can do, what the district can do, what the building can do, what the family can do. And to be intentional about simple tools that will help members have these conversations, exchange, and share the kinds of things that can bring success. So we have a newly formed committee around school behavioral health in APBS, and you're going to be seeing a lot of opportunities now to have these kind of conversations, the things that will allow us to focus on the elements of a story like Minnesota that take us through what it means to really do this work in partnership. So I'm so glad to be a part of this and to have this opportunity to share again in this story of Minnesota. And you can hear my clock again. I forgot to take the alarms off.
That's great. Thank you, Joanne. In Minnesota, we get embarrassed when people say nice things about us. So we'll try to do okay with that. But yeah, thank you very much. And we really appreciate the support all the way through of APBS and the PBIS National Center that has helped us, on our own journey to get there with support through all these years as well. So being part of a community and not having to learn all this on your own is a really important aspect of that. And we appreciate the support and your partnership. A couple of links for resources or follow-ups, or I think we have some emails at the end if you have any questions for us individually as well that we're not able to get to today, but we really appreciate the time.
And there are no questions that have been asked. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you.
Bye.